The truth is, not all tree planting projects are created equal. Some use guesswork and a trust me as verification that your trees have been planted. But there's a lot more to the equation. At veritree, we believe the outcomes of tree planting are just as important as the inputs. That means impact that you can see, measure, and share. This includes bespoke photos and videos from the sites where your trees are planted, and easy to understand data and growth progress that is visualized and shareable on your own digital dash. We are raising the standard of restoration by implementing sensors in the field to predict threats to forests like wildfires and drought. And we're benchmarking the progress of these sites through aerial mapping, LiDAR, and sensor data to gauge changes to the ecosystem over time. We're not just planting trees, we're growing forests.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just going to share my screen here. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. We're thrilled to have you join us. My name is Montana, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at veritree, and I will be your host this afternoon. As you hopefully know, today's webinar is focused on biodiversity, bioacoustics, as well as how we're designing and implementing our smart forests. Today's presentation will be about 30 minutes in length, and we will hopefully have about 10-15 minutes at the end to answer any questions that may come up during today's session. I'm just going to kick off with a few housekeeping items before we kick off the formal presentations. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat. You'll see this chat along the right-hand side. We'll do our best to answer your questions, as I said, at the end of today's session. We're also going to be taking a couple polls today to get some feedback, so please share any thoughts or opinions and responses there as well. Lastly, we are recording today's session, so if you do have to run out or if you do miss anything, don't worry, you'll be able to watch it later. We'll make sure that you also have a copy to the link so you can share it with any colleagues or friends that aren't able to attend today. So with that, I'm going to invite my colleague Kathleen to the stage. Kathleen's going to kick today's session off on biodiversity. Kathleen joins us as our Director of Science at veritree. She really leads all of our efforts when it comes to aligning with the latest nature-related operating, reporting, and disclosure standards. And her background includes key roles at the World Resources Institute, where she advised global restoration efforts. So with that, Kathleen, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Montana. I'm excited to be here. I'm just going to introduce a brief introduction to our processes, the challenge, and the science. Oh, I think we've lost Montana there. I'll be giving a brief introduction before we pass on to the more interesting aspects of the bioacoustics and the field-based data. And next slide, please, Montana. So thinking about the challenge that we have ahead of us, so you're all here, so I guess you're interested in biodiversity, and it's not new to know that there's been a huge decline in global species populations since 1970, and it's estimated there's a 69% decline in species according to the Living Planet report by WWF. And you can see there the number of endangered species is on the rise across bird species and reptiles, insects and mammals, amongst others. And there's the key driver of species risks and endangered species is from land use change. And increasingly, it's going to be climate change. So the 6 key threats are agriculture, hunting, logging, pollution, invasive species, and climate change. And to address this at veritree, we're making sure that we're looking at the risks from the outset and charting the drivers of degradation and seeing that we're mitigating them throughout our restoration projects. Next, Montana. But there is hope. There is a movement towards a nature positive ecosystem and a nature positive world. The UN created the Global Biodiversity Framework a few years ago with a target of 30 by 30, which means to conserve and restore 30% of the world's land and oceans by 2030. Now, this is a bit of an arbitrary target because we're heading towards 2030, but it's important because there's a focus on protecting biodiversity, enhancing ecosystem services, and combating climate change through large-scale restoration efforts. Now, there's a lot of reasons to do this, but three key ones are to protect against extinction risk. The IUCN Red List has over 160,000 threatened species and over 45,000 threatened with extinction. And we need to ensure long-term ecosystem resilience. So we need to think about ecosystem services such as pollination, water services, and align them with nature positive and climate positive targets. And we're seeing increasing regulation, requirements for disclosure and restoration of ecosystems. And this is coming particularly from the UK, EU, and Australia. Next. So to look at the science foundations of what we're doing, we're developing veritree protocols, which are our standard operating procedures of how we address monitoring and measuring and designing our projects. So we work in different ecosystems, agroforestry, mangroves, terrestrial, and we're looking at kelp sea forestation. And the veritree protocols follow 5 key stages. We work closely with planting partners to scope, design, implement, monitor, and report on our impacts and our measurements. Next. And these veritree protocols build up to our veritree standard. And our veritree standard really seeks to provide industry-leading technology, customized reports, tailored project specifications, and we really we rely as well on third-party frameworks, and we adapt those to our own needs for a landscape level approach. There's a lot of frameworks, metrics, and indicators that are created for a national level scale, and we're taking in those approaches and adapting them to a landscape level approach. So we align with indicators and metrics with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Global Biodiversity Framework, and we're also building alignment with the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure and science-based targets for nature. And we do this in a number of ways. So when we're thinking about working with our planting partners, there's measurements that we're taking and data that we're collecting at the pre-planting, during planting, and post-planting stage. And while we're talking about biodiversity today, ultimately we're thinking about overall ecosystem health for people and the planet. So in order to do that, we need to collect data at the pre-planting stage, which looks at land ownership and governance, land use and land cover change. We're creating baselines and conducting risk assessments and creating forecasting for carbon sequestration. At the planting stage, obviously, we need to be thinking about the right tree in the right place. And we're looking at the planting area and the session, the tree count, the species planted, and making sure that we're having the right planting density. And post-planting, well, we're thinking about change on the baseline and looking at land use, land cover change, the survivability of those trees that we planted with partners, and the impact measurement and ecosystem health. And ultimately, we're building that into creating a digital twin so we can really measure and monitor the forests. Next. And in order to do that, it requires an army. So we're working on research and development with a number of universities, the University of Alberta, Columbia University out of New York, University of British Columbia, University of Guelph, McGill University, University of Victoria, and the University of Toronto. And we've created a data lab for research and development in 4 buckets. They're not mutually exclusive, but it helps us categorize our research, looking at geospatial fusion, computer vision, sensors, and governance and social impact. And in terms of biodiversity, we're looking at environmental DNA and hyperspectral imagery. We're looking at identifying trees using computer vision. We're working on bioinformatics, and it goes under the umbrella of data governance. So we're making sure we're following the best processes. Next. And in terms of our ground-based technology, just a quick introduction that we're using and deploying trail cameras to monitor biodiversity. We have ROVs for underwater biodiversity, conducting eDNA samples from water and soil, and bioacoustics monitoring that we'll go into in further depth. And just a quick overview of one of the projects that we're working on with the University of Alberta. Is one of the challenges of biodiversity is it's very locally based. So scale is an issue when we're thinking about how can we understand biodiversity at scale. So we're working on hyperspectral imagery and environmental DNA from the ground. That means that we're looking at the structure and composition and tree diversity of species, and we're looking at the wavelength identification from satellites. And on the ground, we're looking at understanding what mycorrhiza, what fungi, what microbes are there, and what patterns can exist for that indicator species identification. We're rolling that up into an algorithm using random forests in order to have a predicted biodiversity index. So it's work in progress in order to think about how we can really understand biodiversity at scale as one of the elements that we're working on. And next, I will pass on to Kabir to go in depth on the bioacoustics that we're working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right, let's stop sharing my screen here. I'll let you go. We'll ask you to come back, Kathleen, later for some Q&As. All right, so I will introduce our next presentation here. Fortunately for Kabir, he's actually on paternity leave, but Kabir is a data scientist with a background in machine learning, robotics, computer vision, signal processing, and control theory. And he's been very instrumental in setting up our Bioacoustics framework at veritree. So as I said, he is on paternity leave, but he did a wonderful job of walking us through the process that he set up here at veritree when it comes to our bioacoustics monitoring. And I'm pleased to show you a recording that he made the last day he was with us before he went on pat leave. So without further ado, here we are.
I'm Kabir, and I'll be talking about bioacoustics at veritree. There are 4 main topics to discuss. One is a high-level overview of the bioacoustics architecture. The second is how we're creating what we call a local species catalog that contains all the unique species at a particular location. The third is a brief overview of the signal processing and mathematical transformations that we do to the audio files that we get from the field before they're then passed into the last part, which is the AI model, which help us to understand and detect the species that are present in the field, and from which we can calculate the species richness and other bioacoustics indices. I guess the first question is why birds? And the main answer here is that birds are indicative species. They can tell us a lot about the health of the ecosystem. They can tell us about changes to the environment. And veritree as a company, we deal with trees. Our bioacoustic sensors are installed on trees, and birds live on trees. So it's just natural for us to be able to use birds as our sample for creating this bioacoustic service. In terms of our architecture and solution toolings, basically we have bioacoustic sensors in the field. They generate data. That data comes to us for data analysis, which is the first step. We do some cleaning of the data, some chunking of the data. We do some tagging and labeling, which is a one-time task. Once that's done, we do a bunch of signal processing, trying to understand the spectral components of the audio files that we receive, narrowing down the signals into a specific range of frequencies that we're interested in, and then just using the average length of the bird calls to chunk the files into smaller pieces. Another key component is the creation of the local species catalog. The local species catalog contains all the unique species at a particular location. So if you were to give it a site in Kenya, for instance, it will go and automatically scan the web and extract all the unique species of birds that you could find in Kenya, and also attach a bunch of other open source information related to, for instance, the IUCN red list that tells you about the extinction level of that particular species and things like population trend. And this gives us a robust reference data set that we could use for our entire bioacoustic service. Once that is ready, we then pass all of this data, the audio file chunks and the local species catalog, to our machine learning model. The machine learning model is basically a classifier that's going to predict the species based on the audio recordings that's served to it. Once the species is detected and classified, we then have a second level of analysis in which we're able to compute the species richness, the count of the what we call the share of volume, which is basically how active a particular species is in terms of the recordings that we get, and other metrics as desired. So on our local species catalog, these are some of the examples of open sources of information that we merge into creating the catalog. eBird is a big one. It contains globally bird sightings. We have Xenocanto, we have iNaturalis that have like huge catalogs of audio recordings, audio and picture image recordings of different bird species. We also have IUCN red list that tells us about a species being of least concern, or if it's endangered, or if it's perhaps even extinct. So as part of our catalog, we have this table that you could see on the right, and it contains the full information for each species, the full taxonomic information, where it was last found, the date it was found, and this could help us in validating the output of the models and help us like create checks as to the accuracy of the predictions that we get. Another interesting part of the catalog is just a catalog of all the birds that we could get, their images. And this is going to be served to the front end when a user is exploring the website, the veritree platform, and trying to see the detections that the bioacoustic service is coming up with. When it comes to the processing of the signals, there are two things that we're mostly interested in. The temporal processing, which is processing with respect to time. We're able to see the duration of the bird calls, creating an average time duration for that, and using that to chunk the full audio file into segments. The second thing we're interested in is the spectral component, in which we're trying to look at the frequency composition of the audio files. As we know, birds are singing and making calls, and these are occurring at different frequencies. So we want to concentrate on the frequencies that the birds are prevalent in. Once that's ready, we put everything together into what we call this bioacoustic service. We have the bioacoustic center data going into the service, and then we have a bunch of input. One is the master species data, which is the local species catalog. The second is the master bird images. So once you have a classification of the audio file to a particular species, we're also able to extract the image of that species. The third part is a description of each species. So once we have the classification, not only are you able to extract the image of that bird, you're also able to get a very nice descriptive information about the bird in terms of its color, its shape, where it lives, and where it was last seen, for instance. So as an output of the bioacoustic service, we have the predictions, which is the machine learning model telling you this is the species of bird that I found. Second is the analysis. So on top of that species level results, we also have a higher level result at a site level, where you could say, at this particular site, this is the number of species that we see. This is the most active species that we see. And over time, we can basically look at the trend and try to see if there's an increase, if there is an improvement in these important bioacoustics indices. Lastly is the labels, and labels just go back into our validation process. We're able to import it into the software that we use to understand the start and end times for each of the bioacoustic birds that were detected in the audio files. And finally, we have a sample of what we're planning to have as an output that an end user can interact with. It's going to be very, very user friendly. You're going to have a nice picture of the bird, sample audio recordings based on the classification for that particular bird. Important biodiversity indices, for example, the criticality of the species, the population trend, the hours of recording, and even the accuracy of the detection. This is basically at the site level, but then this is basically at the species level, but then at the site level, we are now going to be able to track the species richness, the share of volume in terms of like which species is most active, and other indices as required. I hope you enjoyed this recording, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right. So now I'm going to invite my colleague David to the stage. David Turner is our geospatial and field technology lead at veritree. And since joining us about a year and a half ago, he's played a pivotal role in shaping our data mapping, implementation, and reporting strategies, really helping to enhance our field operations and impact tracking. So David, I will throw it over to you.
Thanks, Montana. I have the privilege to get to talk to all of you today about our new smart forest up in Salt Lake, our smart forest 2.0, if you will. I'm going to chat about some learnings from our first smart forest down in Cochrane, Alberta. Talk about some of the key factors in our smart forest design, how we overcome remote challenges, as I'll get into, some of the new and improved and enhanced technology that we're using at our 2.0 site, and some of the takeaway and next steps, and how we continue to scale these technology deployments across all of our sites. So firstly, some of our learnings from Cochrane, Alberta. About a year ago, in August of 2023, we deployed our first smart forest, and it was very successful up until it hit about -40, and it became very, very cold. And we found that some of our systems were going offline, most likely due to freezing of the batteries, super harsh conditions. So that we had to solve for, absolutely. We also have to solve for the fact that a lot of these forests are not just outside of Calgary and Cochrane, but in Salt Lake. This is, very much northern Alberta, 6 hours north of Edmonton, in fact. So we need a way to be able to control these smart forests, from the office or at home. And also that the implementation matters. The way in which we are dispersing the different technology, different sensors, really matters in the way that we in the data that we're collecting from those sensors, which I'll talk about shortly. So let's get into some smart forest design. As we're creating, the design of a project is very important, not only for how and where to plant trees properly, but also how to use technology and different sensors to properly monitor different impacts and risks, and the growth of young trees. Um, at every site, we create this hexagonal grid, and in each grid's hexagon, we provide attributes. We use a combination of NDVI, of vegetation indices, canopy height, above ground biomass to determine which hexes are our baseline and reference areas within the site. And then we place sensors in each of those areas to monitor each on their own and compare the insights. Now, I mentioned that this was a very, very remote site, and I'll explain a little bit about how we actually got to this site. So it was 6 hours north of Edmonton. It's about a 3-hour drive north to Slave Lake, which is where we were staying. An hour on the highway to get to a logging road. An hour on that logging road to get to the staging area where you can't use a car to access the site anymore. So what we would use is something called an Argo or an XTV, sort of like an ATV, but on tracks, which were absolutely required. And even then wouldn't always work. As you can see, we had some technical difficulties and had to improvise and figure out how to put those tracks back on the vehicle. But yeah, all to say, super hard to get out to these sites. You're not going to be able to go and take out an SD card from a bioacoustic sensor to extract that data. Maybe you could do that once a year. Definitely not on a weekly basis. So we had to figure out some solutions for that as well. Now we'll dive into some of the cool tech that we brought to the site and are utilizing. First and foremost is a DJI Matrice 350 RTK drone with the payload of a ZenMuse L2 LiDAR sensor. This thing was super fun to fly around. We're flying a LiDAR at all of our sites to create carbon baselines, and I'll get into our model that we've built around that in a second. But here you can see, a screenshot of the remote control executing the flight route. It's taking that LiDAR data, that point cloud data in real time, assessing the heights of the trees. It's building it and showing me it on my display. I can, check if there's any areas that haven't been covered or if there's any gaps in the data and go refly. So just a really cool interface and really awesome data collection in real time. This is the end output of that data. On the top left, you can see the RGB output point cloud of the forest, of the smart forest. And on the top right, you can see the same point cloud classified by tree height, with the red being taller, obviously, and the blue being closer to the ground. And the bottom here, you see the side profile of what that forest looks like. The LiDAR payload is it has the ability to take 5 returns, meaning that it can penetrate the dense canopy and reach the actual ground of the forest, really enabling you to create accurate estimations of carbon and above ground biomass. And that's exactly what we intend to do with this data. So we at veritree, we have a green carbon model, which from these point clouds, we can extract the tree heights, the tree height metrics to accurately estimate above ground biomass, create those baselines, and when we can get back out to the site, we can do the same flight and compare and see how much carbon has accumulated from the trees planted at the site. Pretty cool stuff. As well, now we'll get into sort of the actual in situ or ground-based technology that we brought out to the site. What's being pictured here is what we call our root system. We had a root system hub, this black box here. We also had 2 other root system hubs. Within those boxes is the batteries used that are connected to the solar panels that power everything. There's relays which allow us to remotely control everything at the sites. The Starlink system, the bioacoustic monitors. We can set a schedule for everything that runs off of solar power at the site. which is really, really awesome. As you can see on the right, we have the Starlink receiver. We're able to get Wi-Fi at the site, and what we kind of did that was new at this site is beam that Wi-Fi to the 2 other root system boxes. So we only needed one Starlink, and we could get Wi-Fi at 3 different dispersed locations within those reference and baseline areas, as I mentioned previously, to capture that data as well. At each of those root hubs, this was the traditional setup. We have a trail camera that you can see at the bottom, along with the solar panel providing it power. We also have a GPS receiver, the SenseNet gateway, which is talking to SenseNet's sensors, which are helping to monitor wildfire risk and emissions over time, as well as the main solar panel. I've yet to mention the bioacoustic sensor because I'm going to get into that a little bit more in depth. This is a new bioacoustic sensor, which, as Kapir just mentioned, is running our bioacoustic models, however, a light version on a Raspberry Pi within that box. And what that allows us to do is process those bioacoustic detections in real time at the site. And as our Wi-Fi turns on, all of those detections are sent to us, which we can then further process. And as Kabir mentioned, look into species richness and species occurrence at the site. So we've placed a bunch of those boxes, and those are also powered by solar. So there's no need to go and change the batteries as you would have to with a traditional bioacoustic sensor. As well, as I mentioned, we have the SenseNet Fireword sensor helping to detect wildfires in the area. This site specifically was a wildfire restoration site. As you can see, looking at the burnt trees on the right. On the right-hand side, we have another one of those root hubs, which the Wi-Fi is getting beamed towards. Another thing to note here is that the solar panel is very vertical, facing the most optimal points, which in the horizon at which the sun would cross. Being in northern Alberta, the sun doesn't get very high in the sky, so you need to actually lift up those solar panels, make sure it's reaching the horizon, so it's getting some sun during the day, and it'll prevent the batteries freezing, and it will ensure that they have some charge even in the dead of winter. And then, our e-plant sensors on the bottom left, which we disperse around the full site. We had these at Cochrane as well, and they're super useful for measuring tree growth. We'll install these in more mature trees as a proxy for not only tree growth, but environmental conditions such as drought, or risks such as drought, flooding, or windfall. So now looking at the takeaways and next steps, as much as we talk about the design and pre-planting process, every time I visited a site, whether it be in Alberta or Kenya, the local knowledge that our planting partners provide to us is so key and so vital to the success of A, the planting project, and B, any smart forestry project. Huge shout out to Ron from Shakti, who was out there at the site, really helping us navigate to different areas with the Argo, ensuring that we could execute on this smart design that we previously planned out, and definitely improvise where that wasn't possible. Secondly, yes, the smart design is vital for a smart forest, as we've been already receiving some of the data from the trail cameras, from the different sensors that we've placed. It's going to be so key that we have a reference data set and a baseline data set, and we can look at how we're tracking from our baseline to reaching our reference, which is the goal at the end of the day. And finally, looking forward, how do we scale this? Quite a significant deployment in a very remote area, and we're looking even further to deploying these at all of our sites. So now that we've solved the issue of biodiversity monitoring with the live bioacoustic detections with trail cameras, solar powered, we're really looking to decrease the size of these boxes, possibly utilizing a Starlink eSIM of some sort within these boxes. They'll all have internet connection and sending us that live data no matter where in the world they are. It could be as remote as you want. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I look forward to any questions about the site.
Great, thank you, David. So just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat now. We'll try to answer everyone's questions. I do have a couple early birds that were sent in earlier, so I'll start off with these. The first one is for you, David. How do you see smart forest technology evolving in the next few years, and what role do you think it will play in scaling global reforestation efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I touched on it pretty well at the end there. You know, a year ago or a couple of years ago, the thought of having live bioacoustic detections out in the field was unheard of, at least for myself, and definitely not being implemented widely. So the fact that that is becoming a possibility, the fact that we're able to utilize things like Starlink, Wi-Fi beaming, and hopefully in the future these SIM cards to be able to send the data in real time back to our databases is I think the biggest leap. It's just how do we transfer these smart forest deployments into a fully remote location and have it be successful. So I think all of those things are really exciting to look forward to.
Awesome, thank you. Kathleen, I have a question here for you. What do you think are the biggest challenges to implementing robust biodiversity frameworks for large-scale projects?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a number of challenges. I think the movement towards nature positive is bringing about a lot of different indicators and metrics that are needed, whether it's for disclosure requirements or overarching global biodiversity framework. I think there needs to be more alignment, and we're doing our best to think about what does this mean at a landscape scale, and how can we apply these overarching frameworks to our landscapes. So I think the nature positive movement is going in a great direction, and hopefully, there'll be greater alignment across these different systems in future. But at this point in time, we're trying to do that ourselves and think about it at a landscape scale. So that's challenging there. And also, as I was saying, and David has been talking about, it's always to do with scale. How can we put these pieces together into an index? There's certain things you can hear, there's certain things you can see, there's certain things that leave traces in soil. So we're working to put these pieces together so that we can create a scalable methodology that speaks to all these different sensor technologies and technologies, so that we give a whole picture of the area and we can see change over time.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right, we've got a few more questions that are popping in the chat right now. I think, David, this is probably best directed towards you. How does the tech differ depending on the geography? Let's say a reforestation project in Kenya versus Alberta.
It's a great question. I think the tech differs based on the different impacts and risks we anticipate seeing within that geography. And that takes place in the scoping part of our, the V protocol. In Alberta, you have risks such as wind, windfall, and wildfires, things you definitely wouldn't see, in a mangrove ecosystem in Kenya, where things like salinity and drought play a much higher factor. So making sure that we have the technology, let's say, to salinity monitors within our Kenyan projects to monitor for drought and high salinity is very key. And the same goes for Alberta, having those wildfire sensors to possibly alert the local authorities of a wildfire that's occurring are just as vital. So I think it differs in that way. The remoteness is a big factor as well. There's certain areas in Canada where you have great internet connection. You don't need a Starlink sensor necessarily, and our projects across the U.S. as well. Whereas in Kenya, the network's not quite as reliable. It can be spotty at times, so there's those considerations as well. What else? And then I think the way that we utilize the technology is very important as well. Like Kabir mentioned that there's different open source data portals for the different species, for biodiversity monitoring in every different area across the world. So ensuring that we have those catalogs, and we're staying up to date with those catalogs for the specific geography is also very important.
Excellent. Thank you, David. A couple other questions that came in here. Bess is asking, have we ever had any issues with theft or animal tampering with any of our technology in field? And then, Amber has kind of a follow-up that I think relates to this, is how long does the tech stay at the landscape or at the site?
Absolutely, we've had some issues with tampering. No theft as of yet, and fingers crossed. Again, I mean, it depends on the remoteness of the site, but a lot of the tech we do place is in remote locations, so we're not as worried about any theft occurring. What we are worried about is grazing animals such as deer, moose, cows, even cattle, eating the wires at our sites, as we found that they did a lot in our first smart forest in Cochrane. So those are the that's our main concern is wild animals disrupting our cables, or rubbing against a solar panel and dislodging it or something like that. And sorry, Montana, can you repeat the second part?
Yeah, the last question was, how long is the tech intended to stay at the site?
So for our smart forest in Cochrane, the intention is as long as possible. Those dendrometers, those e-plant sensors used to measure tree width, those can last up to 7 years per sensor for a new sensor. Same goes for any of these other IoT sensors or LoRaWAN sensors. I think our intention is as long as possible, and I think we can monitor for a longer period, and there's more longevity with these this new smart forest up in northern Alberta, where we can control things remotely. Things such as how much charge is in the batteries, how long per day do we turn on certain functions, and the way that we've insulated and really waterproofed all of our systems there this time around.
Perfect. And then there's one, I think it's final question here, and it's from Catherine. I think she may have joined a little bit late, but she had questions about accounting for different species with our bioacoustic model. And Catherine, we did record today's session, so we'll send it out to you. But essentially, the model uses open source detection to identify different frequencies to help us identify which species we're hearing. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our presenters, Kathleen and David. Again, we will share out the presentation afterwards. We'll also send up a follow-up email tomorrow. So if you have any feedback, please share that with us. Thank you so much.